Charles Liu Yang Sheng, welcome to BRI Dialogues.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
We're delighted to have you with us, and I would like to provide our audience with just a quick summary of your impeccable background. You were born in Taiwan, graduated from Princeton University with a BA in economics in 1972, and attended a Juris Doctor program in New York University. Then,
Shows my age.
sorry?
It shows my age.
Well, they say I think good things in life are all marinated, Charles. So that
Thank
is a
you.
sign of decades of wisdom. Then forming How Capital, and then you were the managing director of Lazard Asia from 1992 to 1999. From 1975 to 1991, you served in various capacities in United Nations, an institution that is at crossroads as we speak. And then, of course, founding director at Center for China and the World, which we would love to learn a little bit more about. And you're in many ways the wizard, and by many accounts, the how do you say the consigliere and the aficionado of the China Green Tech Initiative. A lot of people consider you as the founding father of that initiative, and you as well served on board of directors of Applied Materials, which is now at the heart of all the technology war between US and China and the microchips and semiconductors. And of course, you have chaired investment committee of Applied Material and the acquisition of $1 billion, and everything else in your impeccable career. So we couldn't ask for a better guest today, Charles, because all of these things are extremely relevant to what's happening. Maybe we should go straight to, 40,000 feet. Where is the relationship of China and United States as Donald Trump heads to Seoul to meet with Xi Jinping? Are we, as the world, witnessing a moment of, it's not that United States is indispensable because the world is trading with China. The share of trade of China with another 165 countries is growing by the hour. And it's not just the tech front, the soybeans as well show that, China can buy soybeans from Brazil. And you hurt me, I hurt you, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Have we arrived to a point of parity in this relationship? And if yes, in terms of power parity between these two on hard and soft power, are we going to see a decoupling from your point of view?
I think there's no question that the US wants a decoupling, but cannot get it. And in terms of the relationship between the two, I think Donald has been one of the best things to happen for China because he showed the world how the US cannot be dependent on. He showed the world US has no credibility and only cares about themselves and not the rest of the world, especially the struggling global south. Who is building up the global south? Who is doing the initiative of Belt and Road, which is your name there, but also new multilateralism, that of the BRICS. The BRICS Bank has been formed to provide assistance outside the IMF framework, which is very restrictive, and Shanghai Cooperation Organization is in the process of setting up something similar as well. These are the new multilateral mechanisms, which is really led by China to create a fairer, more active and vibrant collaboration among the global south. And what does Donald do? He only tells the world, mega. Only the US counts. Even the best allies, like the Europeans and the Canadians, sorry, we want to squeeze you. We want to take your money. We want to put tariffs on your goods and so on and so forth. So I think, he's been really great for China, for the whole world to see what China is about and what the US is about. But of course, The next question is, will they really come into a military conflict?
Interesting.
Ch- Charles, before we get to the scary edge of this about a confrontation between China and the United States, uh, Trump is now in Southeast Asia, and as Ali notes, moving northwards towards East Asia. So, what is your take on this trip? Obviously, it's very late in the cycle of his presidency. He's been everywhere else but this part of the world. Is is he trying to reconfigure relations with ASEAN countries? ASEAN countries, it seems to me, are being squeezed between China and the United States. And he's now got this trade deal with Cambodia and Malaysia. But the key one country, of course, is Vietnam, that both China and the United States have been banking on. What is his ultimate game? To contain China in Southeast Asia, or to broaden America's footprint in that part of the world? Because as you know, Americans now have military bases back in the Philippines. Singapore is close to them, and so on. How do you see his
Yeah,
trip
about
there?
400 around Asia. Yeah. I think what he's trying to do is really put on a show because everything he's tried with the duties, with the another 100% on Chinese goods and blocking Chinese technology, everything he's tried actually has failed to stem China's rise or China's development. If you look at ASEAN countries used to be really in Americans' back pocket.
Hmm.
What we see today is actually much more neutralized ASEAN countries. And the reason is very simple. Disengaging by moving manufacturing to ASEAN countries does not work. No ASEAN country actually has the full capacity and market size and the industrial might to be able to have a complete supply chain on any manufacturing goods. So what happened? Look at Vietnam, 100 million people, grown very fast, but they're only part of China's supply chain. They have not replaced China in any supply chain. And the same can be said for all the other countries.
But
So
doesn't this threaten China's relationship with like Vietnam and other ASEAN countries if United States tries to block China kind of ASEAN hopping all the way to United States market? Isn't that a challenge?
they can challenge all they want. Look at the announcement out of Indonesia last week on buying of Chinese fighter jets,
Right.
the ones that shut down the Indian fighter jets by the Pakistanis. The Gen CE, 10 of them, the 10 Gen J10
J10s.
CE, yeah, J10s. Indonesians are now talking about buying 40 of them.
Mm.
And it's very clear. I have many friends and partners who have investments in Vietnam and investments in Indonesia and Malaysia as well, but they're only part of the supply chain. You cannot break a supply chain and continue to have economic growth, economic development. So I think whatever Donald Trump is trying to do in Southeast Asia is for two things. One is to pressure them for giving him more money, and two is to try to put some, I guess, distance between China and Southeast Asia. But it's very hard to break the economic fundamentals between Southeast Asia and China. Very difficult.
Charles,
Can you have a replacement?
I think it's
Go
very
ahead.
hard. I think that interdependence of ASEAN and China is, part of the long-term planning of China rather than a handicap. I want to spend a bit of our time today with you on AI and on technology and on semiconductors, which is your sweet spot. Before that, Charles, can you bring your screen a little bit lower because we're not seeing your upper body. I'm just seeing your chin and above. Beautiful, fantastic, fantastic. I love that
Sorry.
color that you're wearing. And it's so elegant, so I didn't want to miss it for our audience. What's going on with
Thank
rare
you.
earths, Charles? I mean, are we arriving to a point that strategic petroleum reserves? Do the countries have to build strategic rare earth reserves? And on the back of that, China now dominates that industry and that segment globally. Is there a sense of realism in that we are intertwined in this, and how the entity list, which was created in 1970s by United States, is now being played on United States in reverse mode by China on rare earths? Why US is so
In
flush?
response,
In response, absolutely. And then
right.
why US finds some of the same mechanism that it has applied to other countries for decades when applied to itself so irritating? Where is this discomfort coming from?
I think there are two sides, two parts to this. One is US exceptionalism. We can screw you and beat you up however we want. We can bully you however we want, but don't try to hit us. And China has reached a point of military, economic, industrial strength that it can now say no, and which is what they're doing. Thousands of companies put on the entities list, including, unfortunately for me, some I have invested in. So that's very unfortunate. But what right do they have to say that Huawei has a back door when everybody, including the MI5, MI6 in the UK, said they could not find any back door? It's just trying to crush China's economic and technology development. Now, in terms of the rare earth, I put it to you this way. They can sign all they want, big deal with Australians and Indians and whoever else, but it takes 2 generations to build a rare earth processing capacity. You can have rare earth, but to process it properly down to 4 or 5 nines is not an easy thing. And US simply does not have the technical talent and engineering talent and the sophistication of industrial might to be able to process it within the next generation. So I think China is just, how do you put it? China is just giving the US a little taste of its own medicine.
But Charles,
And
isn't there an angle of environmental impact of processing? And that would be by any means, in many ways, in a holistic way. If there was a more rational, more, I would say, a win-win-win collaboration between the major parties, the world should have somehow acknowledged the
absolutely,
environmental cost that China went through to master this cycle. Because if America wants to bring this onshore, or Europe, can they, or Australia even, can they, based
forget
on,
it.
I
Right.
mean,
Forget it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Win-win situation would be China uses its vast experience in the processing of rare earth and the advanced technologies, which has allows a lot of the environmental impact to be mitigated. Use it for the whole world, but not if US is going to continue to bash China with restrictions on technology, with threats every couple of weeks or every couple of months, another 100% duties on Chinese goods. And the shipping thing was really absurd. You know, if a ship is made by China, whatever it's carrying, you got to charge a couple $100 per container. It's just absurd. But I think in terms of the environmental impact, China suffered a lot, but China has come around. If you've ever been in Beijing recently, you'll see the skies are clear, the sun is bright and shiny. But even more than that, what China has done in terms of contributing to reduction of carbon emission in building up the incredible solar and wind industries to allow solar to be cheaper than coal, cheaper than oil, cheaper than gas. It is incredible what solar is today in terms of pennies per kilowatt hour of power generated for the global south. And only with these type of prices can countries like India and countries of Africa have a chance for modern development. Power is crucial.
Charles, there are a couple of issues that I want to explore with you further. One of them is about the future of hydrocarbons, because China has been, if you like, the whirlwind that so much coal and crude has gone into its development over the last 40 years in particular. But now, as you rightly say, is moved well beyond reliability on dependence on those, even though it's still a major consumer of coal and oil. Nevertheless, China is deliberately moving in the other direction, while United States is moving, digging its heels into oil fields and fracking.
Drill, baby, drill.
Yeah, exactly. So looking forward, say 10 years time, by which time hopefully Trump is a distant memory for most of us, and China will be generating say 50% and more of renewable energy for the planet. How do you see the relationship in raw economic terms as the cost of doing anything per kilowatt hour, as you say, comes down in China and in the global south, and rises United States because of Trump's stupid policy right now?
Policies.
How do you see
Yeah.
this in the next 10, 15 years, changing the relationship between the two? Just that one item of power use.
Yes, it's very clear already how important power is. Uh, Take Africa, for example. Without cell phones, 94% of the population did not have a means of conducting commercial transactions. Smartphones was very meaningful for the rapid development of Africa in the last decade. You need power for smartphones. You need power for everything. So it's critical that the global south gets a chance to develop with power. Now, in China's case, I have to say the government subsidized a lot for solar to become what it is today. And also, a lot of investment have gone in so that given the economies of scale and the modern technology manufacturing, which is prevalent in China today, you have the very cheap solar power, which we can have, and everybody can really enjoy. Now, next 10 years, China just issued its new 5-year plan, 15th 5-year plan. Now, most Western commentators will say China, there's no transparency. I said, you are ridiculous, because the 5-year plan lays out in detail what they want to do, what specific targets are, what they're going to dominate their investments in. And if the officials who promulgated these 5-year plans did not meet the targets, sorry, you're gone. So if you look at the 15th 5-year plan, which has come out, renewed emphasis and focus on new and renewables, but moving it to the Belt and Road, moving it to the global south, but something else that will happen in 10 years, fusion, nuclear fusion. So in a way, me personally, I think solar, wind, all these renewables are actually still transitional. It is fusion that will do it. Now, what will happen with fusion for the global south, especially? Pretty much free electricity, free power. And then they get a chance to catch up. They get a chance to modernize and develop, which I think would be wonderful. Now, in terms of the hydrocarbons, there's an expression which I thought was very interesting that came out of the Saudis. Stone Age did not end because people ran out of stones, because they found metal. Fossil fuels age will not end because we ran out of fossil fuels, because we have newer renewables now. And fossil fuel will always be around for petrochemicals as raw material for many other things. But the prices will not be what the Saudis would like it to be at. So the new renewables for the next 10 years, I believe, will continue to capture the imagination of the rest of the world, given how rapidly, for example, you're in the UK, September of last year versus September of this year, the number of BYD's cars sold in the
Yeah.
UK increased by eightfold,
Yeah.
from a little over 1,000 to over 10,000 in 1 month. If the world goes to electrification, which is cleaner, cheaper, and easier to access, well, sorry, I think
Mm.
the world will change through this transitional period and go to nuclear fusion. But fusion will be very interesting in another way because fusion requires really very extreme smart equipment, manufacturing, and machinery. And I don't see, I do see the US making some breakthroughs on the technology side, but I don't see them with the capacity to be built in the next 10 years to
Right.
be able to manufacture
Mm.
the
Mm.
pieces of equipment that's needed to make it work. So then we'll see what happens,
Right.
if you know what I mean.
Right. Right.
Charles.
Sorry, Ali. Charles, on the question of trajectories, then, if United States continues to plod along with reliance on hydrocarbons and China moves on, reducing the cost of energy input as it has done, what will that do to the American economy? How do you see American political economy of America changing because of Trump's continuing reliance on hydrocarbons? How will that impact the base of the American system, do you think?
I think in terms of the American system, it's more than the American system, all of Europe as well. The Europeans are dependent on energy, and they decided not to take cheap Russian gas from pipes, decided to buy expensive LNG from the US. But that's another question. So European situation, I think, is quite more dire than the United States. But because the United States still has currently usable energy. I think the problem with the US is actually the energy issue is a minor issue compared to something far more significant, far more serious, and that is the financial system.
Mhm.
Since 2008, they started printing money. Now we reach 38, 39 trillion dollars of debt. That's obviously not repayable by any means. But where did all this money go? It went to two places, in my view. It went to two places as parking lots. One is the US stock market. How can you have trillion-dollar valuations of company that could not project in revenues and profitability into the future? $4 trillion valuation. And then how can you have the other parking lot is Bitcoins? Things that's built on nothing is worth $100,000 a piece. And now expansion of that in terms of stable coin and so on. Stable coin is but a means for the US to issue $1 of paper and use it twice or three times.
Hmm.
Because that the treasury bills have to be the basis of issuance of a stable coin. And once it's issued, then you can use it again. So I think the real issue with the US, the real problem is going to be when, not if, but when will this financial Ponzi scheme collapse or crash?
Charles, fascinating listening to you as always. Going back to the debt, and I did a calculation this morning with open sources. Aggregate sum of debt to GDP for G7 economies is 908% of the GDP of them combined. And then the total gross debt of G7 today, $65.42 trillion. Now, that's a mountain to climb up, but I want to go back to the transition to energy and this race for power. And as much as the Western Hemisphere and the way you painted it, Europe find itself with its pants down with no Nord Stream and the cost of energy, to read that they are going back to combustion engines and Porsche, reversing the clock, all of the manufacturers on continental Europe after lecturing decades of the global South about renewables and EVs.
That's right. And carbon emissions.
Exactly. So, but they are caught between a hard place and a rock because China has the rare earths, Russia has the nuclear cycle and fuel cycle. So
Right.
somehow they either have to mend fences with these two superpowers as a Western bloc, or they have to continue with oil and gas, which takes us back to what Anush said. I want you to unpack the dependence for computation and the necessity for power and the role of Gobi Desert and thorium and nuclear, and where China and Russia really are the game changers, whether we like it or not in the Western Hemisphere, for the race to AI. Are they the new cartels or the petro-states in the decade we're going to live in terms of providing the sources of energy for...
Absolutely not. Absolutely not in China's case. What we see in China in terms of solar and wind, for example, is creating abundance so there is accessibility
That is my point.
by the
Yes.
global south. That's what they've done. They've not done what Silicon Valley and the American financiers do, restrict access so you can have a higher margin. I think this is critical if you look at what China has done. In fact, DeepSeek is the same thing. Create accessibility. And this is critical, I think, in the energy side, is you create accessibility through creating abundance, which is what they really have done in a massive way. I look at African countries, great sun, but using diesel generators to generate electricity, which is absurdity, right? So I think in China's case, it's not creation of cartels at all.
No,
It's
where I'm going
making
with this, Charles,
accessibility.
Charles, sorry, where I'm going with this is that the West has to come to terms that this accessibility and, the rollout of the renewables is in the interest of the world order. But for the
Yes.
Western Hemisphere to get to the computation power, they cannot do it without nuclear, without SMRs, and without the rare earths. So they are between a hard place and a rock. I'm not alluding that China is cutting the global south from affordable energy. That wasn't my point.
Oh, right. Okay. In that case, we're talking about AI.
Yes,
I have to say, personally, I use DeepSeek all the time. It's wonderful. But I think AI is, again, a Ponzi scheme.
interesting.
It's a way of getting companies' valuations up to trillions of dollars. It's a way of keeping the markets rolling high. It's a way of creating stories. Oh, all of a sudden, you're going to build 3 nuclear reactors in Abu Dhabi so you can have the most advanced AI data center in the world. Does that make any sense to you? Doesn't make any sense to me. I know the leaders, many of the leaders in the Middle East, everybody talking about AI. But my view on the AI is that it's a bubble that's bigger than the internet bubble of the late 1990s. Because AI, all the talk about AI is large language learning machines. What I see in China is not that. It's sector specific applications that's being created with AI that is in the medical health sector, in the industrial sector, in the manufacturing sector, even for lawyers, and so on and so forth. This is something else. US may talk about deep science, but China talks about applicability and pragmatic use. which is actually what I think AI can really do for people. But the bubble, part of that bubble that I was talking about in terms of Wall Street, this is a big part of that bubble, the AI bubble.
Charles, the you know the in the 19th century, Western companies went after territories and resources of the global South for massive profit maximization, and they did it. And they basically ruptured any chance of evolution in the global South. I fear that with AI, for all the faults that you've rightly identified, there is the so many countries and leaders seem to think it's the new El Dorado. That, as you say, they're building energy infrastructure to fuel AI. If this is a fool's gold, it's going to be a very expensive fool's gold in terms of environment, not just economy. I'm reading now data that African countries are running out of water, are depriving their own populations of basic needs to try and find energy and water to become hosts of these AI power machines. Do you think this cycle will end in a happy way?
Well, I don't think this cycle is going to run very long because I think, for example, in terms of the African countries that I'm involved in, I have a number of projects in Africa in terms of microgrid, creation of electricity, because they can't afford to build a grid. So microgrid is the solution, right? And the, the African countries that I look at may come up with some stories in order to get votes for the next round of elections. But the real pragmatic approach is using microgrid and solve the electricity problem, not to build this to be hosts to big data centers. Because I think the real sophisticated African leaders, and many of them are increasingly more sophisticated than those of decades ago, know that this is just a story. This may be some way of getting some Western aid money, but it's not real. Now, the Middle East is a little different because they have lots of money and they would like to put on a big show. They would like to be numero uno in their neighborhood, right? So there's that competition. But even that competition is changing because, for example, the mega projects of Saudi Arabia, which were announced in 2017, NEOM and Line, and so on and so forth. What do we see today? The latest budget, zero allocation of funds to them. These were projects dreamed up by the Boston Consulting Group types of US advisory firms that puts the interest of their pocket making money above that of the country or the interests of the people of the country. So I think, but these countries have learned. Why is it that Saudi Arabia is no longer putting money into these mega projects dreamed up by the BCGs of this world? They're all learning. I think
Are they learning,
just
Carl? Are they learning? Because now they're shifting the same money to AI. Yesterday, FT cover said all of the budget from NEOM is moving to AI. So I see them creating digital embassies, paid by them on their shore, computing for American companies, data managed by Americans at their expense and at their heating temperatures, scorching high temperatures that the climatic temperatures in parts of the GCC are shooting to the
you're
roof.
right. You're right. You're right. But how much of this commitments and promises to the American big companies are real? For example, I was told by very good sources in Saudi Arabia that when DeepSeek was hit the market in April, I think is this year, Aramco put it on all their servers, Saudi Aramco. And not only that, DeepSeek, in order to have broader reach on a global basis, created an Arabic version of DeepSeek. So again, when these things come to the market in a way that is free, open source, things will happen. People start wondering, why are we talking about billions of dollars for big data centers when it's not necessary? The big data center they're talking about is really for big language modules, not for application use.
Interesting. Charles,
So,
I want to pick your brains on, you're a man of finance. You have been at the heart of deal structuring, banking, investment banking. Um, Swift as a weapon broke the myth of neutrality. Yeah?
yes, politicized.
Politicized. My question to you, as an investment banker, as a global entrepreneur, is that tomorrow, if the global south would like to trade more in their own multi-currency basket, to
Mhm.
this day still, as we're speaking, the grid of financial investment is still on American nerve system, fiber optics,
Yes,
Swift and the
yes.
rest of it. Will the next confrontation phase between the West, as called, meaning DC and the vassals of Europe, and China be, or the global South be, I'm sorry, I see you want to trade between rupee and renminbi, but not on my grid. Are we going to see a grid confrontation in multi-currency payment system in the next 10 years?
I think that we see it on now already. Because, for example, did you know that 4 years ago, China Central Bank and UAE Central Bank collaborated on the digital RMB, and that 2 months ago, a transaction on a trial basis took place, a shipload of LNG out of ADNOC, out of UAE, was transacted as it left the port for China in 7 seconds in RMB. So I think this is already beginning to happen because instead of 3 or 4 days for settlement under the SWIFT system, the Chinese system, the CIPS system is much more sophisticated. It takes advantage of blockchain and all the modern technologies which can help. Now, US is going to try to continue to use the SWIFT system to pressurize countries, politicizing it, and so on and so forth. But you can only do that for so far and so long because the rest of the world is now already, many of them, entering quickly into China's concept of local currency settlement.
But Charles, my question is that
Up.
SIPS not sitting on fiber optics and the electronic grid of United States? I'm asking to learn. I don't know. Is SIPS interdependent on the fiber optics, on the grid that exists today, albeit the fact that it's in Emirates, dirhams, and renminbi, or is it completely off the grid from the nerve system of current international payment system?
Okay, okay. We can put it this way. This is a very important part of the building of new infrastructure because the old cables are old cables, but much of the new cables are laid by the Chinese through
Okay.
the Belt and Road. It's not something that can happen overnight, but it has been happening. It will continue to happen. So I think that is the new digital infrastructure above and beyond the previous infrastructure of Belt and Road that was building roads, building ports, building highways, but now it's digital, including infrastructure for EVs, charging stations, right? That's infrastructure as well.
So is China through BRI, which is our motto, as you know, um,
Mhm.
now emerging as a new orbit for Eurasia as a whole? And if that is the trend that you're alluding to, Charles, that is the way that we're going, that actually trade is just the froth. on the surface, it's this infrastructure which is creating these organic ties between China and the rest of Asia, let us say for the moment, and so on. Do you see then that eventually there will be a process of shifting resources eastwards as well? Because at the moment, all it takes is for Trump to go to Qatar or UAE and Saudi Arabia, and they all then pivot back to the United States. So there is this continuous discrepancy that the more they do with China and Asia, the more they want to be kowtowing to the United States. When is this kind of dichotomy, this confusion going to break, do you think?
Professor, I have to tell you something. Did you know that there are hundreds public schools in UAE which now teaches Chinese? And in Saudi Arabia, all students up to high school have to take 2 courses of Mandarin per week. Things are changing. What is on the surface is very different. What is on the surface is Donald Trump goes there and say, "Oh, invest $400 billion into the US." And the Middle Easterner says, 400 billion, we'll make it 1 trillion. Is it going to happen? It's not going to happen. When he visited Saudi Arabia on his first term as president, I think commitments of 100-some billion were made on buying from the US. But I don't see that happening. I don't see that even that round happen. I think everybody knows sometimes I hate to use the expressions like this. Everybody knows Donald Trump wants people to lick his ass, to pay homage to him. So you can say all you want, but just like him, he says all he wants, but he doesn't deliver. The rest of the world is going to say, "Oh, Mr. President, you're so smart, you're so brilliant, you're so wonderful," but goes about his own business as if he doesn't exist.
Charles.
Sorry, I get a little excited about
No,
this
that's
because I
fine, Charles. That is the most how do you say visual reference in political discourse that we've had on BRI Dialogues, the first. But we will definitely invite you in the future episodes for more how do you say humor and soft touch into it. It's well needed at the times we live in. In 2008, post-financial global financial crisis, China came in fiscally helped, and never acknowledged for the pumping of the money into the markets and revitalizing. It was like a defibrillator, basically, when the markets collapsed. This time around, when the bubble burst on all of this, jingoism of the Russian doll investments, Nvidia in OpenAI in, Intel in
right,
AMD
right,
and all of that.
right, right.
When this burst, do you think, given that China's strategic patience has been stretched as well, will China again intervene if there is a major financial crisis as a result of this? Or will there be a major financial crisis based on this bubble, a contagion, or not? Or do you think this time the world is much more better protected with airbags and insulated, or we're again into a to pick up on your how do you say metaphors, in a bigger shit show this time, courtesy of Sam Altman?
I think the crash will be very substantial,
Hmm.
very, very big. But if you look at the Chinese policies, they've been planning for this possibility for years. They don't change their government with midterm elections every 2 years. And they have been looking at contingency plans, many, many contingency plans in case this happens. I think what I'm concerned about is the ability of many countries in the global south being able to withstand this. Now, what we see with Belt and Road, obviously, is building of physical infrastructure. Now, what is happening is the movement of people and goods and even ideas through this infrastructure that's been built. So that's, I guess, Belt and Road version 2.0,
Right.
including digital Belt and Road. This allows the possibility of China being able to assist and help Belt and Road countries in case such things happen, because China is the premier or the number one trading country of over 130 countries, right?
Mm.
So their economies are tied, more integrated in a way than with anybody else. But what will really happen is the US will try to do a couple of things. Number one, steal and rob from the rest of the world. Number two, we see this already. Look at the rise of gold prices. You think it's a market force? I don't think it's a market force. It's US claims to have a lot of gold in the Federal Reserve. The more gold you claim to have, the more credibility your financial system has. You know, to see gold increase by tripling
Mm.
in a couple of years, it's kind of strange.
Mm.
So I think that disaster and the collapse that will happen is the U.S. financial markets, unless they can really steal more, like they're trying to do now. Even their brothers, their best allies, their best friends, they're trying to rob. Now, Europe is in dire shape. Europe is really in dire shape. Once you deindustrialize, as in the case of the US, you cannot reindustrialize without generations of commitment. Now, when you have governments that change every couple of years, you don't have the planning and the strategic vision to be able to do that. And Europe lived off the fat that they collected off the global south for centuries. No more, I'm sorry,
Mm.
no more.
Mm.
If you see what's happening in Africa, for example, Niger's case, in terms of the French and so on and so forth, Africa is trying to wean itself off the last vestiges of colonialism. And when that happens, they have a chance of really moving to the modern world.
Mm. Charles, we've talked a great deal about the North Atlantic Alliance, but it's curious that there is, of course, one integral member of that community is Japan. Now with its first female prime minister and a new cabinet and so on, and about to be confronted by Trump on the East Asia scene. So while Europe is struggling with its geopolitical problems, Japan has its own problems, domestic, but also geopolitical. Where do you see Japan trying to balance pressure from the United States against its economic interests, which are with China and ASEAN that are brought up earlier? And they've got, it seems to me, quite a greater deal of residual power than some European countries have, and yet they don't seem to be able to exercise it. Do you have any views on that?
Well, it's very difficult when you have a dozen US bases in your country and the US continue to pressure Japan as a losing war. There is strong interest in Japan, and it surfaced on occasion of Japanese wanting to become more independent and having more sovereign rights than they have now. I think China doesn't really think much about any threats of any type from Japan or South Korea. It's no comparison. If Japan did anything negative militarily, they'd be wiped out in less than a day. Because this is something that people don't realize, I think, is how advanced China's military technologies have become. Take, for example, on September 3rd, in the military parade, I happened to be with RT that day. And it was interesting. One of the commentators on RT said, if you looked at the huge carriers of missiles and so on and so forth, Going down China Street, you don't see a single puff of smoke. Unlike 3 or 5 years ago, when these big trailers were puffing black smoke all over the place. What does that mean? They've all been electrified, which is, I think, is another advancement on the military side, on the equipment side. And then the other part, which is significant, is China is the only country in the world today that has complete supply chains which can make a difference, not only in terms of people's lives, but also in terms of protection. Oh, speaking of which, I have a good story for you. A
Please go
friend
ahead.
of mine from Africa, friend of mine from Africa said, the rapid growth of Africa in the last decade, we have to thank Shenzhen. And I asked him, why? Why Shenzhen? He said, because first of all, Huawei and ZTE build out our smartphone 4G and 5G system so that over 90% of the people who don't have bank accounts can now conduct commercial transactions. And then that's not the only part. He said, the other part, which is important, is only Shenzhen's supply chain was able to make $50 smartphones, so accessible to all. Think about Apple for $50 or not even $500. So again, this comes from abundance created allows accessibility for the global south. There's still a lot more to do, I think, in terms of providing power and water, two key things for Africa especially.
Charles,
But those
I want to ask you two questions, and given the time difference and being late at your end, we don't want to bother you for too long.
no,
My first question is, what advice would you give to Western capital looking to engage in China without falling foul of the neo-geopolitical red lines on both sides? And the last question, which is a standard for all of our guests, is what is your single most important piece of advice to xenophobes and xenophiles?
both are very difficult. No, in terms of capital, I think I would suggest for those big in the capital management side, as I had done in private equity, to look at not only changes geopolitically, but also the financial markets. It is very important, I think, for anyone with a portfolio to look at the importance of diversifying their portfolio away from the traditional Wall Street stocks and US treasuries and bonds, right? And to look more, as the Middle Easterners have done, at the Asian markets, especially China. A number of the sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East have been investing heavily in Chinese companies, especially in the secondary market of Hong Kong, or through the secondary market of Hong Kong, and very profitably, in fact. Now, in terms of China, we just want to be friends. We don't want to be loved. We don't want to be hated. We just want to get along and make the world better for everybody. This is what they've done in China. I watched over the last 4 decades of how that process has been. They're not looking at conquering anyone, even though they had ships all over the world before Columbus. They've never colonialized anyone. And until today, People's Republic of China has never invaded any country. And when they beat invaders back, they never try to follow up and conquer the opponent. China thinks about harmony. For, for millennium, they think about harmony. Unlike, I lived in the US for a long time. Unlike the attitude of the US, I'm afraid, is you have to be a winner or a loser. For example, even in sports, overtime. Why overtime? Because we haven't found a winner yet. We haven't gotten a loser yet. You can have double overtime, triple overtime. The whole idea of overtime is make sure we identify a winner and a loser.
Mm.
Why can't we think about harmony? Why can't we think about having a better life for all? Because Europe, if you don't make peace with the global South, I think Europe is going to be in pretty deep trouble going forward because they will have burned off most of the wealth they've accumulated by robbing the former colonies. Anyway, I
Charles,
hope that works.
Charles,
Yeah,
it's very, very instructive to have such clear analysis of China's purpose and also the crisis that the old world, if you like, is facing. My takeaway is take China at face value. Don't don't come with prejudices and take it literally that what it says is genuinely what it intends. And I think that is, to answer Ali's question to you, is perfect way to end our dialogue with you is that, you know, don't double guess China, talk to China and interact with it, and then you will see what's in it for you and how China can manage it. So for that, as well as all the other insights they've given us, we're really grateful to you for taking the time to be on BRI Dialogues, Charles. Thank you very much indeed.
thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to express some, well, not anti-Western, but some, I think, very strongly Chinese views.
Hmm.
And I think maybe they're held by a lot of people in China. And we don't want trouble. We don't want conflict. We don't want confrontation. We just want stability and harmony so we can all have a better life.
Hmm.
Not only China, but the global South.
Hmm.
They deserve it too.
Hmm.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.